The wine glass slipped from my trembling fingers as my sister Madison's cruel laughter echoed through our family's dining room. "How does it feel to be useless, Serafina?" She sneered, her emerald eyes glinting with malice I had never seen before. 23 years of sisterhood shattered in that moment. But what destroyed me wasn't just her words. It was the smug satisfaction on our parents' faces, the knowing glances exchanged around the table, and the horrifying realization that this entire Christmas dinner had been orchestrated specifically to humiliate me. Before I dive into this family betrayal story, I would love to know where you are watching from tonight. If this hook already has your heart racing, please hit that like button because trust me, you are not prepared for the twists coming. Subscribe if you enjoy stories about karma coming full circle, and let me know in the comments if you have ever experienced family betrayal like this. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare began. 3 months before that devastating Christmas dinner, I thought I was living my dream life. At 25, I had recently graduated with my master's degree in nonprofit management and had thrown myself into managing our family's charitable foundation, the Whitmore Legacy Fund. My parents, Robert and Eleanor Whitmore, had always spoken about leaving a meaningful impact on the world, and I believed I was helping them achieve that vision. The foundation had been established by my grandfather 15 years earlier, with an initial endowment of $12 million, meant to support educational initiatives for underprivileged children across our state. I had poured my heart into this work, often staying late into the evening to review grant applications, coordinate with schools, and ensure every donated dollar reached the children who needed it most. Madison, my older sister by 2 years, had always seemed disinterested in the family business. She worked in corporate law downtown, drove a luxury car I knew her salary could not afford, and lived in a penthouse apartment that cost more than most people's annual income. I never questioned where her wealth came from because I trusted my family implicitly. That trust would prove to be my greatest mistake. The discovery happened purely by accident. I was preparing our quarterly financial report when I noticed a discrepancy in our scholarship distribution records. According to our books, we had awarded $50,000 to Lincoln Elementary School for their after-school tutoring program. However, when I called the school to schedule a follow-up visit, the principal told me they had never received any funding from our foundation. My stomach dropped as I began cross-referencing other recent grants. Hamilton Middle School, Roosevelt High School, Jefferson Academy. None of them had received the funds we claimed to have distributed. Over $200,000 in supposed grants from the past 6 months were completely fabricated. I spent 3 sleepless nights digging deeper into our financial records, my laptop screen burning my eyes as I traced money trails that led nowhere. What I discovered made me physically sick. For the past 3 years, someone had been systematically embezzling from the foundation. They had created fake recipient organizations, forged documentation, and siphoned off nearly $1.8 million. The theft was sophisticated and calculating. Whoever was responsible had intimate knowledge of our accounting system, access to our bank records, and the authority to approve large financial transfers. Only 3 people in our family had that level of access: my parents and Madison. My hands shook as I printed out bank statements and traced the money trail. The stolen funds had been funneled through a series of shell companies with names like Educational Excellence Initiative and Future Leaders Foundation. These organizations existed only on paper, their addresses leading to empty office buildings and mail forwarding services. The most devastating discovery came when I traced the final destination of the stolen money. It led directly to accounts controlled by Madison. Her luxury lifestyle, her expensive apartment, her designer clothes, everything had been funded by money stolen from children who desperately needed educational support. But the betrayal went even deeper. As I continued investigating, I found evidence that my parents were not innocent victims. Email chains buried in our foundation's server showed conversations between my father and Madison about managing the family assets more efficiently and redirecting funds to more immediate family needs. My mother had been complicit too. She had signed off on fake grant approvals, her elegant signature authorizing the theft of money meant for underprivileged children. The woman who had raised me to believe in charity and giving back to the community had been stealing from the very people we were supposed to help. The cruelest part was realizing how they had used me. While I worked tirelessly to promote our foundation's mission, attending charity galas and speaking to donor groups about our impact on children's lives, my own family was systematically destroying everything I believed we stood for. I had unknowingly been the face of their fraud, my genuine passion for our cause, providing the perfect cover for their criminal activity. I felt like I was drowning in my own naivety. Every speech I had given about our foundation's work, every thank you letter I had written to donors, every promise I had made to struggling schools, all of it had been built on lies. I had been their unwitting accomplice, and worse, I had been their fool. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Bank records, forged documents, shell company registrations, email communications. I had built an airtight case against my own family. The question that haunted me as I sat in my apartment at 3 in the morning, surrounded by printed evidence of their crimes, was what I should do with this information. Part of me wanted to believe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that could make this all make sense. But the numbers did not lie, and neither did the trail of deliberate deception I had uncovered. My family had stolen nearly $2 million from a charitable foundation, money that could have changed hundreds of children's lives. As I stared at the evidence spread across my coffee table, I realized that this discovery would change everything. My relationship with my parents, my bond with Madison, my entire understanding of who my family really was. Nothing would ever be the same. But I also knew I could not stay silent. Too many children had been robbed of opportunities they deserved, and too many donors had been betrayed by people they trusted. The weight of this knowledge felt crushing. I was about to destroy my own family, but staying silent would mean becoming complicit in their crimes. As I finally closed my laptop and tried to sleep, I knew that tomorrow would be the beginning of the most difficult period of my life. I had exactly 72 hours to decide how to handle the evidence burning a hole in my conscience. The upcoming board meeting for the Whitmore Legacy Fund was scheduled for Friday afternoon, and I knew this would be my only opportunity to expose the truth before my family realized I had discovered their scheme. The board consisted of 5 members: my parents, Madison, myself, and our family's longtime attorney, Marcus Fitzgerald. Marcus had been my grandfather's closest friend and had helped establish the foundation. If anyone could be trusted with this information, it would be him. I spent Wednesday morning carefully organizing my evidence into a comprehensive presentation. Bank statements, forged documents, shell company registrations, and email communications were methodically arranged to tell the complete story of the embezzlement. My hands trembled as I created slides showing exactly how much money had been stolen and where it had gone. Thursday evening, I met Marcus at a small cafe across town, far from any place my family might visit. The 70-year-old lawyer listened in stunned silence as I walked him through my findings, his weathered face growing pale as the scope of the fraud became clear. "Serafina," he said, finally removing his glasses to clean them with shaking hands. "This is far worse than I could have imagined. Your grandfather would be devastated to see what has become of his legacy." Marcus confirmed what I had suspected. The embezzlement was not just morally wrong, but criminally prosecutable. The foundation was registered as a public charity, which meant stealing from it constituted both fraud and theft of public funds. My family was looking at serious federal charges if this evidence reached the authorities. "What do you want to do?" Marcus asked gently. "I can contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, but once we start down that path, there will be no going back. Your parents and Madison could face decades in prison." I stared into my coffee cup, watching steam rise as I contemplated destroying my own family. But then I thought about the children at Lincoln Elementary, who never received their tutoring program, the students at Roosevelt High, who lost their after-school activities, and the countless young people whose futures had been stolen to fund Madison's luxury lifestyle. "They need to face consequences," I said quietly. but I want them to have a chance to confess first. Maybe if they come clean and agree to return the money, we can handle this without involving law enforcement. Friday's board meeting felt like walking into a lion's den. I sat across the polished conference table from my parents and Madison, my laptop containing their downfall sitting innocuously in front of me. They chatted casually about holiday plans and foundation business, completely unaware that their world was about to collapse. Before we discuss new grant proposals, I began, my voice surprisingly steady. I need to address some discrepancies I have discovered in our recent financial reports. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Madison's eyes narrowed slightly, and my father's jovial expression faltered. My mother continued smiling, but I caught the barely perceptible tightening around her eyes. What kind of discrepancies? My father asked, his tone carefully neutral. I opened my laptop and projected the first slide onto the conference room screen. It showed the Lincoln Elementary grant report alongside a letter from the school's principal stating they had never received any funds. This kind of discrepancy. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my family's faces carefully as I methodically presented each piece of evidence. Madison's confident demeanor cracked first. Her face went white when I showed the bank records tracing stolen funds to her accounts. My mother gasped audibly when the shell company registrations appeared on screen, her carefully maintained composure finally breaking. My father, however, surprised me with his reaction. Instead of shock or shame, his expression hardened into something I had never seen before: cold calculation mixed with barely contained rage. When I finished my presentation, he leaned back in his chair and studied me like I was a particularly troublesome business problem. "You have been busy," he said finally, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Tell me, Serafina, what exactly do you think you are going to do with this information?" The question caught me off guard. I had expected denials, explanations, or perhaps tearful confessions. I had not expected this calm, almost threatening response from the man who had raised me. "I am hoping you will do the right thing," I replied, my voice beginning to shake. "Confess to the board, return the stolen money, and resign from your positions. If you do that, we might be able to avoid criminal charges." Madison laughed, actually laughed, at my words. It was a sound I had never heard from her before, sharp and cruel. "You naive little girl. Do you really think you can threaten us?" "This is not a threat," I said, standing up and fighting to keep my composure. "This is evidence of criminal fraud. You stole nearly $2 million from a charity meant to help children. How can you sit there and act like this is acceptable?" "Because my father said," rising from his chair with deliberate slowness, "we built this foundation. We decide how its money gets used. And frankly, investing in Madison's future is a much better use of funds than throwing money at schools that will just waste it anyway." The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. These people had raised me, taught me about right and wrong, and instilled in me a sense of social responsibility. Now they were calmly explaining why stealing from children was justified. Marcus, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke up. "Robert Eleanor Madison, what Serafina has uncovered here constitutes serious criminal fraud. I strongly advise you to consider her offer to handle this internally." My father turned his cold gaze to Marcus. "And I strongly advise you to remember who pays your retainer fees, Marcus. This family has been good to you for 30 years. I would hate for that relationship to become complicated." The threat was clear, and I watched Marcus's face pale as he realized the position he was being put in. This was the moment I understood that my family was not just guilty of fraud, they were dangerous people who would do whatever it took to protect themselves. "You have until Monday morning to decide." My father continued, looking directly at me. "Either you destroy this evidence and never speak of it again, or you force us to take more drastic measures to protect our family's reputation." As the meeting ended and my family filed out of the conference room, I remained seated, staring at my laptop screen. The evidence was still there. The truth unchanged, but everything else had shifted. This was no longer just about exposing fraud. It had become a war, and I had just declared myself an enemy of my own family. The weekend following the board meeting felt like living in a psychological thriller. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages from Madison, alternating between sisterly manipulation and barely veiled threats. "Think about what you are doing to our family," she wrote. "Do you really want to destroy everything grandfather built over some accounting errors?" My parents were more subtle but equally persistent. My mother called Saturday morning, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Darling, your father and I are worried about you. You seem stressed lately. Perhaps you should take a vacation, clear your head before making any hasty decisions." I knew what she really meant. They wanted me gone while they figured out how to handle the situation. Maybe they were planning to destroy evidence, or perhaps they thought distance would make me reconsider exposing their crimes. Either way, I was not going anywhere. Marcus called Sunday evening, and I could hear the strain in his voice immediately. "Serafina, I have been thinking about our conversation, and I believe we should explore alternative solutions to this problem. Perhaps a private family mediation would be more appropriate than involving outside authorities." My heart sank. The pressure from my father had worked. Marcus, who had been my only ally in that room, was backing down. I was completely alone in this fight against my own family. That realization might have broken me, but instead it sparked something unexpected: determination. If my family thought they could intimidate me into silence, they had seriously underestimated who I had become. I spent Sunday night researching my options and developing a strategy that would make their fraud impossible to hide. Monday morning, I did something that felt like stepping off a cliff. I called the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and spoke with Special Agent Sarah Chen. Agent Chen listened carefully as I explained the situation, and within 2 hours I was sitting in a federal building downtown, walking a team of investigators through my evidence. "This is exceptionally well documented," Agent Chen told me as she reviewed my files. "You have essentially built our case for us. With evidence this comprehensive, we can obtain search warrants for their personal and business accounts within days." But the agent also warned me about what was coming. "Once we execute these warrants, your family will know you were our source. Are you prepared for the consequences of that?" I thought about the children who had been denied educational opportunities because of my family's greed. "Yes," I said firmly. "I am prepared." The FBI moved faster than I had expected. By Wednesday morning, federal agents were executing search warrants at my parents' home, Madison's apartment, and the Foundation's offices. I was not there to witness the raids, but Marcus called me within an hour, his voice shaking with fury. "How could you do this to your own family?" he demanded. "Do you have any idea what you have set in motion?" His anger confirmed what I had suspected. Marcus had warned my parents about the investigation. The family lawyer who had pretended to support me had been working against me all along. I was truly on my own. That afternoon, my phone exploded with messages from extended family members, family friends, and even childhood acquaintances. Word was spreading quickly through our social circle that the FBI was investigating the Whitmore family for fraud. The story was already being picked up by local news outlets. My cousin Jessica, whom I had always been close to, called me in tears. "Serafina, please tell me this is some kind of mistake. Uncle Robert said you have been having mental health issues and making false accusations. This cannot be real." Hearing my father's spin on the situation made my blood boil. He was painting me as unstable and vindictive, trying to discredit me before the truth could fully emerge. But Jessica's call also gave me an idea. If my family was going to fight dirty by spreading lies about my mental state, I needed allies who could vouch for my character and credibility. I started reaching out to people who had worked with me at the foundation, teachers from schools we had genuinely helped, volunteers who had witnessed my dedication to our mission, and donors who had seen my passion for our work. One by one, I explained the situation and asked for their support. The response was overwhelming. Mrs. Patterson, the principal at Riverside Elementary, immediately offered to testify about my character. "You have always been completely honest and transparent with us," she said. "If you say there was fraud, then there was fraud. Dr. Williams, a professor who had collaborated with us on several educational initiatives, was even more supportive. I have worked in nonprofit management for 20 years, and I have never met someone more ethical or dedicated than you. If you need anything, letters of recommendation, testimony, media statements, just ask. But my most important ally emerged from an unexpected source. While reviewing old Foundation emails for additional evidence, I discovered correspondence with Elena Rodriguez, an investigative journalist who had written several articles about our Foundation's work. Elena had always been thorough in her reporting, asking detailed questions about our grant distributions and impact measurements. I decided to reach out to her, figuring that if this story was going to become public anyway, I wanted someone credible telling the truth, rather than letting my family control the narrative. Elena agreed to meet with me that Friday at a small restaurant downtown. I have to admit, Elena said as I finished explaining the situation, I always wondered about your foundation's reporting. Some of your claimed impacts seem too good to be true. Now I understand why. Elena had investigative skills and resources that I lacked. She could trace financial records through databases I did not have access to, contact sources in law enforcement, and most importantly, she could ensure that the true story reached the public before my family's version took hold. I want to help you, she said, but I need you to understand what you are signing up for. Once I start digging into this story, it will become very public very quickly. Your family will likely retaliate against you in ways you have not imagined. I thought about Madison's cruel laughter, my parents' cold threats, and Marcus's betrayal. They have already made it clear that I am no longer part of their family. I would rather stand alone with the truth than be welcomed back with lies. Elena spent the weekend verifying my evidence and conducting additional research. By Monday, she had uncovered even more damaging information. The shell companies my family had used were connected to other fraudulent schemes. Madison had been using foundation resources to pay for personal expenses. Everything from spa treatments to luxury vacations were being charged to fake business development accounts. But Elena's investigation also revealed something that gave me hope. The FBI case was progressing rapidly because other victims had come forward. Apparently, my family's fraud extended beyond just the foundation. They had been running investment scams targeting wealthy widows, promising to manage their charitable giving while actually stealing their money. You started something bigger than you realized, Elena told me. Your evidence was the key that unlocked multiple investigations. There are at least 12 other victims who will finally get justice because of your courage. As we prepared for Elena's article to be published, I felt a mixture of terror and relief. The story would expose my family's crimes to the world, but it would also vindicate my decision to speak up. Most importantly, it would ensure that the stolen money could be recovered and returned to its intended recipients. The night before the article was scheduled to run, I received one final message from Madison. You have destroyed our family over money that was not even yours. I hope you can live with yourself. I stared at the text for a long time before deleting it without responding. My family had destroyed themselves through their own greed and cruelty. I had simply refused to help them cover it up. As I prepared for this media storm that was about to hit, I realized that while I was losing the family I had been born into, I was gaining something even more valuable: the respect of people who shared my values and the knowledge that I had done the right thing, no matter the personal cost. Elena's article was scheduled to publish Tuesday morning, but Monday night brought a devastating phone call that changed everything. Dr. Williams, the professor, who had been one of my strongest supporters, called me at 11 p.m. with panic in his voice. Serafina, I am so sorry, but I cannot testify on your behalf anymore. He said, his words rushed and nervous. I received some information today that has made me reconsider my position on this situation. My stomach dropped. What kind of information? Your family's attorney contacted me with documentation showing that you have been receiving psychiatric treatment for delusional episodes. They provided medical records indicating that you have a history of making false accusations against family members when you feel stressed or overwhelmed. The lie was so outrageous that I initially laughed. Dr. Williams, you know me. You have worked with me for 3 years. Do I seem delusional to you? The documentation was very convincing, he replied weakly. I cannot risk my professional reputation by supporting someone who might be experiencing a mental health crisis. I hope you understand. After he hung up, I immediately called Mrs. Patterson, the elementary school principal, who had offered to support me. Her response was even worse than Dr. Williams's. Serafina, honey, I think you need help, she said, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine concern. Your parents called me today and explained everything. They are worried sick about you. This delusion about them stealing money, it is a symptom of your condition. They showed me the medical records. What medical records? I demanded. I have never received psychiatric treatment in my life. The documents clearly show treatment for paranoid personality disorder and a history of making false accusations during stressful periods. Your family loves you, dear. They just want you to get the help you need. One by one, my supporters fell away. The foundation volunteers who had promised to speak on my behalf suddenly became unreachable. Former colleagues stopped returning my calls. Even some of the teachers from schools we had actually helped began questioning my credibility. My family had orchestrated a character assassination campaign that was both brutal and effective. They had somehow created fake medical records documenting mental illness I had never experienced, and they were using these fabricated documents to discredit me before the FBI investigation could gain momentum. The betrayal that hurt most came from Elena Rodriguez. When I called her Tuesday morning to discuss the article publication, her tone had completely changed. Serafina, I have decided not to run the story, she said coldly. After reviewing additional information about your background, I have concerns about the reliability of your accusations. What additional information? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Medical records indicating a history of delusional behavior and false accusations. I cannot stake my journalistic reputation on sources that may not be credible, I am sure you understand. The crushing realization hit me all at once. My family had not just stolen money, they had the connections and resources to manufacture evidence and manipulate people's perceptions. They could create fake medical records, pressure witnesses, and control the narrative in ways I had never imagined. But the worst betrayal was yet to come. Agent Chen called me that afternoon with news that made my blood run cold. Miss Whitmore, I need to inform you that our investigation has been suspended pending a review of new information that has come to light regarding your mental health history. What are you talking about? I demanded. We received documentation from your family's attorney indicating that you have a documented history of making false fraud accusations during periods of psychological distress. The Bureau cannot proceed with an investigation based solely on accusations from someone with a history of delusional behavior. I felt like I was drowning in quicksand. Every move I made to fight back seemed to drag me deeper into their trap. My family had not just covered up their crimes, they had systematically destroyed my credibility in ways that would be nearly impossible to overcome. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by evidence that I knew was real and truthful, but which apparently meant nothing without credible witnesses to support it. Bank records, forged documents, email communications, all of it dismissed because my family had successfully painted me as mentally unstable. The fake medical records were particularly insidious because they contained just enough real information to seem legitimate. They referenced actual stressful periods in my life: my grandfather's death, my college graduation, starting my job at the foundation, and claimed that these events had triggered episodes of paranoid behavior and false accusations. Marcus, my family's attorney, had clearly orchestrated this character assassination with surgical precision. He had used his legal connections to create documents that would stand up to casual scrutiny while systematically contacting every person who might support me. The isolation was overwhelming. Friends stopped calling because they believed I was having a mental breakdown. Professional contacts avoided me because they thought I was delusional. Even my own evidence seemed worthless when everyone believed I was incapable of rational thought. Wednesday morning brought the final blow. I received a formal letter from the Foundation's Board of Directors signed by my parents, Madison and Marcus, officially removing me from all positions and banning me from Foundation premises. The letter cited serious concerns about your mental health and recent erratic behavior as justification for my dismissal. They had not just discredited me, they had completely removed me from the organization I had dedicated my life to serving. The foundation I had poured my heart into was now entirely under the control of the people who had been stealing from it. That afternoon, Madison called me for the first time since the FBI raid. Her voice was sickeningly sweet, like she was talking to a confused child. Serafina's sweetie, Mom and Dad and I are really worried about you. We know you have been under a lot of stress lately, and we think you might be experiencing some psychological difficulties. We have found an excellent treatment facility that specializes in helping people with your type of condition. My type of condition, I repeated numbly. Paranoid delusions, false accusations against family members, inability to distinguish between reality and fantasy. The doctors say it is actually quite common in people who have experienced significant stress. The good news is that it is very treatable with the right medication and therapy. The audacity was breathtaking. They had stolen nearly $2 million, destroyed evidence, manipulated witnesses, and fabricated medical records, and now they were offering to have me institutionalized for exposing their crimes. We have already spoken with Dr. Morrison at Hillside Treatment Center, Madison continued. He is expecting you tomorrow morning. If you voluntarily commit yourself for treatment, we can put this whole unfortunate episode behind us. The family is willing to forgive and forget if you get the help you obviously need. I hung up without responding, finally understanding the full scope of their plan. They had not just wanted to discredit me, they wanted to have me declared mentally incompetent so that anything I said about their crimes would be dismissed as the ramblings of a disturbed person. As I sat in my apartment that night, completely alone and apparently defeated, I realized that my family had underestimated one crucial thing about me. I might have lost this battle, but I was far from giving up the war. If they thought they could destroy me this easily, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The lowest point of my life lasted exactly 18 hours. Wednesday night, I considered whether Madison might be right. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I did need professional help. But Thursday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. "Is this Serafina Whitmore?" asked a crisp professional voice I did not recognize. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Detective Maria Santos with the State Financial Crimes Unit. I understand you have been having some difficulty getting people to listen to your concerns about the Whitmore Legacy Fund." My heart started racing. "How did you know about that?" "Because 3 months ago, my unit opened an investigation into your family's foundation based on a tip from a concerned donor. We have been building our case independently, and your evidence would be extremely helpful to our investigation." I almost cried with relief. Someone in law enforcement was taking this seriously. Someone who had not been influenced by my family's character assassination campaign. Detective Santos explained that their investigation had begun when Margaret Thompson, an elderly widow who had donated $50,000 to the foundation, became suspicious about how her money was being used. Mrs. Thompson had requested detailed reports about the specific programs her donation was supporting, and when the foundation could not provide satisfactory documentation, she had contacted the State Attorney General's office. "Mrs. Thompson is a retired accountant with 40 years of experience," Detective Santos explained. "She knew something was wrong when your family's financial reports did not add up. She has been working with us to gather evidence for months." Within 2 hours, I was sitting in Detective Santos's office sharing my evidence with investigators who actually believed me. More importantly, they had their own independent evidence that corroborated everything I had discovered. "Your family made a critical mistake," Detective Santos told me. "They assumed that elderly donors would not ask difficult questions or demand detailed accountability. Mrs. Thompson proved them wrong." Margaret Thompson was everything my family had underestimated in their victims. At 78 years old, she was sharp determined and absolutely furious about being deceived. When Detective Santos arranged for us to meet, I immediately understood why my family had failed to manipulate her. "Young lady," Mrs. Thompson said, grasping my hands firmly, "I have been fighting con artists and fraudsters for longer than you have been alive. Your family picked the wrong person to steal from." Mrs. Thompson had documentation that my family could not discredit or explain away. She had copies of every communication with the foundation, detailed records of her donation, and most importantly, she had been secretly recording her phone calls with my parents and Madison for the past 2 months. "Always record your business calls, dear," she told me with a mischievous smile. "It is amazing what people will admit when they think no one is keeping track." The recordings were devastating. In one conversation, my father casually mentioned that the foundation was more of a family investment vehicle than a traditional charity. In another, Madison laughed about how easy it was to redirect funds to more practical purposes than education programs. But Mrs. Thompson's most valuable contribution was her connections. As a retired accountant who had worked with nonprofits for decades, she knew people in state government, federal agencies, and the nonprofit oversight community. She had already been sharing our evidence with contacts in multiple agencies. "Your family made another mistake," she told me. "They assumed that discrediting you would make this investigation disappear. But fraud is still fraud regardless of who reports it. The evidence speaks for itself." Detective Santos's investigation had uncovered the same shell company's fake recipients and financial manipulation that I had discovered, but they also had additional evidence that I had not been able to access. Bank surveillance footage showed Madison personally depositing foundation checks into her private accounts. Email records subpoenaed from the foundation's server contained even more damaging communications between my family members. Most importantly, the state investigation had not been derailed by my family's character assassination campaign because it had begun independently of my involvement. Detective Santos had never seen the fake medical records, had never spoken with the witnesses my family had influenced, and did not care about my supposed mental health history. "Even if everything your family claims about your mental state were true," Detective Santos explained, "it would not change the fact that we have independent evidence of systematic fraud. Mathematical evidence does not depend on the psychological state of the person who discovers it." The investigation was moving quickly because Mrs. Thompson was not their only victim. 2 other elderly donors had come forward with similar experiences, and each of them had their own documentation of the foundation's fraudulent activities. My family had been running the same scam on multiple victims, apparently believing that older donors would be easy to deceive and unlikely to ask difficult questions. Friday afternoon brought the news I had been hoping for but hardly dared to expect. Detective Santos called to inform me that arrest warrants had been issued for my parents Madison and Marcus. The charges included fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy. "We will be executing these warrants Monday morning," she told me. "I wanted to give you advance warning because this will likely become a media circus once the arrests are made." But Detective Santos also warned me that my family would probably realize what was happening over the weekend. People with resources and connections often get tipped off about pending arrests. Do not be surprised if they try to contact you or pressure you to change your story. She was right. Saturday morning, my mother called me, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she sounded genuinely frightened. "Serafina, sweetheart, we need to talk. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding with the authorities, and we need to present a united family front. Can you come over for dinner tonight?" I almost laughed at the transparent attempt to manipulate me one last time. "I will not be coming to dinner, Mom. And there is no misunderstanding. You, Dad, and Madison stole nearly $2 million from a charity. Now you are going to face the consequences." The silence that followed was long and heavy. When my mother finally spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of maternal warmth. "You have destroyed this family over money that was rightfully ours. I hope you are satisfied with yourself." "It was never your money," I replied. "It belonged to the children you stole it from. And yes, I am satisfied that justice is finally being served." Sunday evening, Mrs. Thompson invited me to her house for dinner. Sitting in her elegant dining room, sharing a meal with someone who had shown more courage and integrity than my entire family combined, I finally felt like I was no longer fighting this battle alone. "You did the right thing, dear," she told me as we finished our meal. "It took tremendous courage to stand up to your own family. Your grandfather would be proud of the woman you have become." As I drove home that night, I realized that I had found something more valuable than the family I had lost. I had found people who shared my values, who believed in truth and justice, and who were willing to fight for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. Monday morning arrived with the sound of breaking news alerts on my phone. "Prominent local family arrested in charity fraud scheme," read the headline from our city's largest newspaper. By noon, the story was being covered by state and national media outlets. The arrests had gone exactly as Detective Santos had predicted. My father was taken into custody at his office, my mother at their country club during her weekly tennis game, and Madison at her downtown law firm. The images of them in handcuffs being led away by police were broadcast on every local news channel. Marcus, the family attorney who had orchestrated my character assassination, was arrested at his law office. The charges against him included not only conspiracy to commit fraud, but also falsifying documents, specifically the fake medical records he had created to discredit me. The fake medical records turned out to be Marcus's biggest mistake. Detective Santos's investigation had easily proven that the supposed psychiatric treatment had never occurred. The doctors cited in the fabricated records had never heard of me. The treatment facilities listed had no record of my ever being a patient, and the medications supposedly prescribed to me had never been filled by any pharmacy. When confronted with evidence that the medical records were forgeries, 3 of the witnesses who had abandoned me immediately called to apologize. Dr. Williams was particularly contrite. "Serafina, I am deeply sorry for doubting you," he said, his voice heavy with shame. "The forged documents were so convincing that I never thought to verify them independently. I should have trusted my personal experience with you rather than believing fabricated paperwork." Mrs. Patterson, the elementary school principal, was even more apologetic. "You have always been nothing but honest and dedicated in your work with our children. I feel terrible for allowing myself to be manipulated into questioning your integrity." The media coverage was extensive and largely sympathetic to my situation. Elena Rodriguez, the journalist who had originally abandoned the story, published a long article about how she had been deceived by the forged medical records. Her piece included a detailed examination of how my family had systematically attempted to discredit me and destroy the investigation. "This case illustrates the sophisticated lengths that white-collar criminals will go to in order to protect themselves," Elena wrote. "By fabricating mental health records and manipulating witnesses, the Whitmore family nearly succeeded in portraying their victim as an unreliable narrator of her own experience." The legal proceedings moved swiftly because the evidence was overwhelming. Detective Santos and Mrs. Thompson had built an airtight case that left little room for my family's defense attorneys to maneuver. Faced with bank records, recorded conversations, forged documents, and multiple victims, plea negotiations began within weeks of the arrests. My father, who had always prided himself on his business acumen and community standing, was the first to break. He agreed to plead guilty to fraud and embezzlement charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He also agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in recovering the stolen funds. Madison held out longer, apparently believing that her legal training would help her find a way out of the charges. But when prosecutors presented the recorded conversations, where she laughed about stealing from children, her attorney advised her to accept a plea deal. She ultimately pleaded guilty to conspiracy and money laundering charges. My mother's case was the most complex because her role had been more passive. She had signed fraudulent documents and had knowledge of the scheme, but she had not been the primary architect of the fraud. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal that included restitution and community service but avoided prison time. Marcus faced the most serious consequences because of the forged medical records. Falsifying documents to obstruct a criminal investigation carried additional penalties beyond the original fraud charges. He was ultimately sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and disbarred from practicing law. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. Between frozen bank accounts, seized assets, and insurance claims, investigators were able to recover nearly 90% of the stolen funds. The money was returned to the foundation and distributed to the schools and programs that should have received it originally. Lincoln Elementary finally got their after-school tutoring program. Roosevelt High School received funding for new computers and educational software. Hamilton Middle School was able to expand their arts program. Watching these programs come to life with recovered stolen funds felt like a form of justice that went beyond criminal convictions. Mrs. Thompson became much more than an ally in the investigation. She became a chosen family member who filled the void left by my biological relatives. She invited me to spend holidays at her house, introduced me to her extensive network of friends, and became the grandmother figure I had never had. Family is not just about blood relationships, she told me over Thanksgiving dinner 6 months after the arrests. Family is about people who support you, believe in you, and share your values. By that definition, you have gained far more family than you have lost. She was right. Detective Santos became a close friend who taught me about resilience and pursuing justice. Elena Rodriguez became a mentor who showed me how to use my story to help others. Dr. Williams and Mrs. Patterson became trusted colleagues who supported my efforts to rebuild the foundation's reputation. A year after the arrests, I was invited to speak at a national conference about nonprofit fraud prevention. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of foundation executives and board members, I shared the lessons I had learned about the importance of transparency, accountability, and the courage to speak up when something is wrong. The hardest part of exposing fraud in my own family was not losing their love, I told the audience. It was realizing that their love had been conditional all along. Real love does not ask you to stay silent about wrongdoing. Real love does not punish you for having integrity. The Whitmore Legacy Fund was eventually reorganized with new leadership and stronger oversight procedures. I chose not to return to a leadership role, instead serving on an advisory board that helps other nonprofits prevent fraud. The foundation now serves as a model for transparency and accountability in charitable giving. 3 years later, I still live in the same city where my family's crimes made headlines. I could have moved away and started fresh somewhere else, but I chose to stay and rebuild my life here, surrounded by the people who had shown me what real family looks like. Sometimes I wonder if my parents and Madison ever truly understood the impact of their crimes. Not just the money they stole, but the trust they betrayed and the relationships they destroyed. Madison was released from prison last year and moved to another state. We have had no contact since her conviction. My parents served shorter sentences but lost everything that had defined their social identity. Their reputation, their community standing, their legacy, all of it destroyed by their own greed and the elaborate cover-up that ultimately made their crimes far worse. But from the ashes of that destruction, something beautiful grew. I learned that integrity is not about perfection. It is about having the courage to do what is right, even when it costs you everything you thought you valued. I discovered that family is not about blood, but about choosing to support each other through difficult times. Looking back on that Christmas dinner when Madison laughed and asked how it felt to be useless, I finally have an answer for her. It feels like freedom. Freedom from people who would ask me to compromise my values for their comfort. Freedom to build relationships based on honesty rather than obligation. Freedom to know that the children who benefit from our foundation's programs will actually receive the help they need. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what is right? Have you experienced the pain of discovering that people you loved were not who you thought they were? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories help me feel less alone in this journey. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in impossible situations. Share this with someone who might need to hear that doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it costs everything. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting others who have found the courage to speak truth to power. Remember that justice may be delayed, but it is rarely denied when good people refuse to stay silent. Your integrity is worth more than any family name, any amount of money, or any temporary comfort that comes from ignoring wrongdoing.